The sun has gone down at Hangman's Hill, and the ghost at Misery Corner isn't walking tonight.
So, welcome to the Weird Tales radio show, your weekly fix of ghost stories, urban myths, magic, and folklore. And now, here's your host, writer, award-winning journalist, best-selling author, and sometime werewolf hunter, Charles Christian.
Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Weird Tales radio show podcast. Our big story this week is Norwich Ghost Walks, and we have an interview with the mysterious man in black, caped crusader that is the Shadowcaster. I'm in the Cornhall Diss, a town that takes its name, according to one legend, after one of the gateways to hell. But with me is the Shadowcaster, who is with Norwich Ghost Walks. And we'll start off by asking Shadowcaster just to tell us a little bit about what Norwich Ghost Walks do and what they offer.
Well, essentially, you'll be guided around the city of Norwich by myself, and a number of stories will be imparted to you, revealing some of the strange and disturbing history of the city, and also some of the eerie phenomena which has been reported and experienced by many people over the centuries. Mm-hmm. And these start from the Adam and Eve pub, which is the oldest surviving tavern in the city, and our public walks on a Monday, Tuesday or a Thursday start at 7:30 and can be attended without booking. So, yeah, we hope to see you there.
I'll offer an opportunity to go into more details of your upcoming programme towards the end. Right, now, one of the things that's intriguing is you are in full costume as Shadowcaster, and that I understand the tradition of Norwich Ghost Walks is that you don't reveal who the narrator, the guide is, that you all have this image, alter ego. How would you describe it?
Well, it is a job title. The Shadowcaster. I am one of many Shadowcasters, dark sorcerers who spend much time in meditation, learning the secrets of the universe by accessing the Shadow Realm. And I was appointed thus by the Guild of Shadows, given a good word by my glorious predecessor, the Man in Black, who many of you will know. So there we are. It's a lifelong commitment, I'm afraid. Many years of training, and I'm really just at one of the bottom rungs. There is so much to learn.
Brilliant. And we're not obviously going to go into the detail of your programme and give the game away, but for people this is an international podcast, for people who are unfamiliar with Norwich, we're dealing with a city that was the second city in England for many centuries.
It certainly was, and that's perhaps why it had the wealth to create some of the heritage that it still retains. The cathedral, obviously massively iconic, but roads such as Elm Hill, which were rebuilt very swiftly and efficiently after the Great Fire. And then we have the town centre of Tombland, mm-hmm. which was the original town centre of the little hamlet of Northwick, which became Norwich. So yes, there's a lot of latent history hanging around its medieval streets.
And I mean, it's had Saxons, it's had Vikings, it's had the Normans.
Everyone's been through Norwich, but nobody goes there now.
Lovely. And again, one of the points is a lot of the medieval and Tudor parts of Norwich still exist. So, in the streets.
Exactly. Well, it's like I was saying, because of the wealth of the city, we were able to retain so much. And for example, our wonderful monastery building, which is out at the back of St Andrew's Hall and,
Yes.
and also makes up part of the art school, is quite a rare case because, very few places had the wealth to buy their monastery building when Henry VIII was dissolving it all
Yes.
and essentially demolishing all of
Yes.
the monasteries. So there's pockets of that around Norwich which are very specific to the city and its wealth at the time, certainly the 1500s, with all of the wealth generated by the textile industry from the strangers from
Yes.
Belgium and Holland. So yes, it's been well looked after, our medieval quarters.
Yes. And of course, another factor was, for a long time, Norwich was constrained by its city walls, and all the buildings took place within the city walls.
Yes.
You get
Well, and it's
the
interesting.
lanes and things. You go up and you go down, but you can't go out, if you like.
And I've just been looking into a tale of a family who lived just outside of the city walls, and of course at the time they didn't consider themselves of Norwich, but nowadays it is very much consumed by the city.
Yes.
The position of their old house where Hassett Tower used to stand, and that's just over the River Wensum from the Cow Tower.
Right. Is that of Blennerhassett?
Yes, correct.
Yes. Because there's a
Oh,
tale. There's a
yes.
tale that he.
Mr. Blunderhazard.
Yes, he rides from near Beccles.
Yes. Now where is it?
It's a hall just on the outskirts of it.
That's right.
Yeah.
Where were the old Barsham?
Yes.
Barsham Hall.
Yeah. Yes. And
And supposedly comes cracking the whip, driven by a headless horseman, all the way to Hassett Tower. But looking into it, it seems there may be a mistaken belief there that the Cow Tower is Hassett Tower. But in fact, it seems that there was a Hassett Tower over the river, just near where the Heathgate estate is now, and so there's some confusion about it. In fact, the website of the Blennerhassett family, with all of their family trees and things, state that Cow Tower is Hassett Tower. I think there's some mistake there.
Yes.
But I'm not entirely sure.
yeah.
So if you know anything, please do reveal your secrets on pain of death.
It's yes. I'm always fascinated by these tales of people who, on the day of their death or whenever the celebration of it, the anniversary of it, they're driven round by headless postmen and headless horses. I'm not quite sure how that works.
Well,
it's,
whether
poor old Thomas Boleyn has that one, doesn't he? Where Anne Boleyn's father,
That's right,
and he's got
yes.
to get over 12 bridges or something by
Yes.
between midnight and cock's crow.
Now, there's differing suggestions about these headless horsemen. I mean, they seem to be very much a diabolical conjuration. Whether these are really the experiences that people are having of the paranormal effect, or whether these are some folklore, there are certainly many tales that it seems that people like to remember these somewhat dastardly people as being taken away by the devil himself or the devil's coachman. As a moral tale, if you behave as the devil,
Yes.
then you shall be taken by the devil and spend the rest of your eternity with him. So there's something in that. Now, there is certainly a divide between folklore and what people experience as paranormal activity.
Yes. Yes.
And often my research into these stories becomes a case of unpicking which it is.
Yeah.
And obviously, if I can find people today who've had these experiences,
Yes.
then it very much changes where I'm coming from
Yeah.
about this story.
And the stories you tell, are they you're not simply reciting, repeating old, everybody's heard them before type ghost stories. You're adding your own element to it and adding your own research, are you?
Well, yes. Oh, yes. Wow, yes. Me and especially the Silent Hand,
Yes.
who is with us, of course, but entirely invisible. A massive amount of research has gone in this year. An almost exhausting amount of research at times. And this has been, I suppose it has been our desire, having been gifted this opportunity, to bring it into the modern era. And I think people are really keen to hear the genuine history of Norwich. Mm-hmm. And they are also keen to discover what experiences people have been having that have been defying logic. Mm-hmm. And I mean, my predecessor was a wonderful storyteller, and but for sure we have gone into more depth than he did. And I think that's important. Also, I've found it very important to relate to the people coming on the walks and ask them, well, what have you experienced? And how many people here have experienced the paranormal or believe in it or know somebody? And there is so much incredible information at our fingertips that it's been a pleasure, really, to conduct this research.
What sort of proportion of people going on your walks have had paranormal experiences?
Roughly a third. And I think that is quite telling. There's a massive number of people who believe they have had some sort of experience that they couldn't logically explain, and perhaps they've put it down to some sort of ghostly activity or a loved one sending a message or all sorts. There's clearly some paranormal activity happening right around us now. The doors are slamming. But it's very rarely talked about. And I think that's a real interesting quality that the Norwich Ghost Walks has. It's a potential forum for people for a space to be created in order for people to share these stories and these experiences.
Yeah.
I don't think people realise just how many of us have experienced something.
And are the people going on it, obviously you will get tourists, visitors, but are there a substantial number of Norfolk and Norwich people going on it, just wanting to know more about their city?
And they certainly do really appreciate this extra light being shed upon their dark history. It's quite eye-opening.
Yeah.
Yes, we do. I wouldn't know the percentages, as I don't specifically ask people, but we do get a lot of tourists as well.
Yes. And I say, obviously, we don't want you to give away the game, but can you give us an example of a particular macabre or unsettling story?
Well, I mean, there's so much to choose from in the city. The Victorians meticulously detailed the murders of the city, and there are some really quite gruesome and fabulous accounts of murderers who have been said to return to us, whether night after night or seasonally. What do I want to share with you? Let me see. Well, now, perhaps of some interest is Father Ignatius, who you may have heard of. No?
No.
Well, he was a very eccentric individual who I am still learning a lot about, and apparently I may even have got him slightly wrong. So this is a chap who turned up in 1863 on the top of Elm Hill, and he was dressed in the traditional Benedictine robes and a great crucifix around his neck, and he settled there, and nobody really knew who he was or where he had come from. And he was a wonderful preacher, a man with a fantastic voice, and there's portraits of him online, and you can see he's got these wild, sparkling eyes. that he was a very engaging individual. But he had an incredibly short temper. And if anyone was to upset him in any way, or just ignore his invitation to prayer, or argue with him in some way, then he would just fly off the handle and he would begin damning people's souls to the fiery pits of hell right there in the street on Elm Hill. So you can imagine he built up a bit of an ill reputation around the street. People weren't so keen on this. Now, this went on for a couple of years before finally he was turfed out, effectively, for not paying his rent. Well, it turns out he wasn't actually a real monk. He was categorically disapproved of by the church. And so he was driven out wherever he went, and left a sort of a trail of destruction, it seems. And he has been seen many times since. In fact, he was seen in the 1800s, about 40 years later, and actually the people of Elm Hill were convinced he was back. Such a potent manifestation is Father Ignatius that people don't actually think that they have seen a ghost. People report seeing a fully clothed monk in flesh and blood standing there on Elm Hill, staring at them, I'm told. He could no longer damn us with words, but he's quite an intimidating force, one of many monk ghosts in the city. But yes, he's still seen to this day, apparently, and I've actually met people who've reported seeing this monk and maybe turned around at the top of the hill to wonder who on earth that was, and nobody's there at all. And he is a very, very powerful and potent figure. And I may have come into contact with him on a number of occasions.
Tell me more.
Well, the first time I feel something strange may have happened at the top of Elm Hill was that I was telling this exact story, and I was explaining the point at which he returns after 40 years, I beg your pardon, to upset the community. And at this very moment, I gesture over towards this gloriously spooky little dark door on the top of Elm Hill, when this ragged, eccentric-looking gentleman comes flying down the street and lands in the doorway. And he turns to face us and a crowd of about 20 with wild, staring eyes. And I say, well, here he is, ladies and gentlemen. And there's a joke made, but he says absolutely nothing and looks at us in sheer horror before continuing on down the street. Well, slightly disconcerting, nothing much to be thought of it, just wonderful timing. But then, a second occasion on which, just after I explain this part of the story, I tend to take the crowd towards the little door to read them the plaque which is on the wall, which is a fantastic, eccentric little plaque in the city's history. And just at that moment, this old, blackened wooden door with iron poles in it just swings open to reveal this spooky little corridor heading off down into the building, into a courtyard, I believe. And that was a wonderful little moment for everybody too. Fantastic timing. I closed the door and saw that it was completely locked. There was no way to open it. There was nobody there. So clearly, logically speaking, it must have been just off the latch.
Yes.
But the timing was sensational. So we had a joke about that. But then a third occasion on which it was a dreadful night. The rain was beating down, it was cold, it was unpleasant. This was last May, I believe, not long after I'd taken over. All of these events took place in the first 6 or so weeks of me telling these stories. And only 2 people arrived on this walk. It was a woman from Norwich who had brought her good friend over from America and was bringing her on the ghost walks. And being as we were a very intimate little group, I got to know them a little, and I found that this little middle American woman was a medium. And she was reluctant to let me know, but nevertheless, I was very excited. And as we walked along, we asked her many questions about what she could sense in the city as we went past. The Maid's Head was an extremely potent moment for her. She was experiencing all sorts of strange energy coming out from the route through to the Maid's Head courtyard, where the horse and carriages used to go. Now, she believed someone was trying to get out at her, and I said, wow, well, I don't know any stories of that nature. I have many stories about the Maid's Head Hotel, but nothing about anyone being locked back there. I said, could you tell us some more? And she was just about to speak when again, this maddened character from the street came rushing towards us, completely ignored myself, the 6-footer in the black cloak,
Yes.
ignored the silent hand, equally spookily dressed, and ran straight to this woman, this medium, and began shaking her violently and asking her if there was any chance he could get a drink in there. And I tried to break this scenario, being considerably concerned for her safety.
Yes.
And I told the man that there was really no chance he would get a drink in there. It was a hotel and not a public bar. But he completely ignored us and went storming through the doors into the hotel. She was very shaken. And she said to us, do you know, this happens so often. When I try to communicate what I'm experiencing, it's almost as if the spirits themselves summon something to stop me in my tracks. And we were all very excited. That was a wonderful thing to experience.
Yeah.
Marvellous. So then I was quite keen to take her up Elm Hill. And as we approached this little spot where I'm so used to telling this story about Mr. Ignatius, she stopped us in the road and she said, my gosh, I can see a man up ahead. And we all looked, and there was not a single living soul on the hill. She said, he's dressed as a monk. I said, you are kidding me. He's self-flagellating, she said. Really? I said, he's beating himself. Well, you are not going to believe the story I am just about to tell you. Well, of course, she did believe the story.
Yes.
Because she could see him right there before us. None of the rest of us could see sight nor sound of Mr. Ignatius. And there we go. I told her the story, and she proceeded to tell me that I had him all wrong. He was not an angry, misanthropic character, but instead he was very much repentant and punishing himself for all eternity there on the hill outside of his little abandoned monastery building on Elm Hill. So somewhat spooky, and certainly the most paranormal activity I have personally received on my ghost walks.
That's fascinating, that. That's wonderful. And the actual walks, how long do they take?
Well, when we began, they were coming in at 2 hours, and sometimes a little more, depending on the size of the crowd, which was much in the same vein as the Man in Black. But I have recently, since Halloween, realizing how significantly colder it is, I've reduced them very slightly by about 20 minutes.
Yeah.
So, and I may even stick with that, as 2 hours is a long time for people to concentrate, and I feel that sometimes by the end people are wearing a little thin.
Yeah.
People grow tired and you need a break. It's well known in theatre, in fact, that a significant break is needed halfway through in order for people to recollect their thoughts and regain their attention. So 2 hours is a long time.
Yeah. And what, just to sort of wrap up, what programme do Norwich Ghost Walks and yourself have over the coming winter months?
Well, the only thing we have now for you are the Christmas specials, which start on the 10th of December and run every weeknight up until the 21st. So please do join me for some festive misery. Wrap up very warm. And they will be a little shorter again, just over an hour, I should imagine, and you will receive a mince pie and a hot mulled wine as part of the deal. So there's something to balance the...
And for people interested in finding out more, the website is www.ghostwalksnorwich.co.uk. Is that the best way to find out more about yourselves?
Absolutely. I mean, you can join us on any one of our horrid little social media streams. I believe we have Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and all of that nonsense. So you're welcome to join us on there.
Norwich Ghost Walks as well.
Or Ghost Walks Norwich, I believe.
Depending on...
Yes, I'm not in charge of all of that stuff. It's the Guild of Shadows you have to report to. But nevertheless, you can find us in all sorts of guises on the internet.
Shadowcaster? That was marvellous. Thank you very much indeed.
Well, thank you very much for speaking to me.
Something wicked this way comes. Weird Harvest Press presents Harvest Hymns, the sweet fruits and twisted roots of folk horror, a 2-volume set of books investigating the music of folk horror, featuring contributions from some of the biggest names in the field: Candia McCormack, Johnny Trunk, Maddie Pryor, Sharon Krause, Jim Jupp and Kemper Norton, to name just a few. Available now via lulu.com. 100% of all Weird Harvest Press profits are donated to wildlife charities.
Welcome, fool. You have come of your own free will to the appointed place. It is time to keep your appointment with the Wicker Man.
That's it. We're almost out of time for this episode 45 of the Weird Tales Radio Show podcast. Janie and I will be back with you again next week, and we hope you will join us. In the meantime, let's just squeeze in one last story, because tomorrow, the 14th of December, is St Tibba's Day. That's Tibba. Who's she, you ask? Well, St Tibba and her cousin Iaba lived in Rutland in England in the 7th century and were probably nieces of King Penda, the monarch of Mercia. They were reputed to be fond of hunting before they became devout hermits, and were both made saints after their death. Because of her early liking for the chase, St Tibba has been adopted as the patron saint of falconers and wildfowlers. But otherwise, she's only remembered around Ryehall, which is the area where she lived and died. And there is apparently a well named after her. There's even some disagreement about her feast day. Many sources say it is the 14th of December. However, the Oxford Dictionary of Saints says it is the 6th of March. You do wonder if in Saxon times they were a little bit desperate when it came to thinking of making people saints. You know, how bad were the rest of the people that a hermit wildfowler gets the job? But anyway, that's all for now. Until next week, stay well, stay weird, and stay different. Good night.
Black Shuck, the demon dog of East Anglia, is baying at the moon, which means it's time for us to go. You've been listening to the Weird Tales Radio Show with Charles Christian, your weekly fix of ghost stories, urban myths, magic, and folklore. Keep in touch with us online at www.urbanfantasist.com or by email at urbanfantasist.icloud.com or on Twitter at Christian Uncut. Good night. Join us again next week for another edition of the Weird Tales Radio Show.